Oh yeah, welcome to Comic Con. Because the Arrowverse, like The Flash and Arrow and Supergirl, are doing DC's biggest story, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which revolves around Elseworlds and the DC multiverse, I thought it was a perfect time to look at DC Comics. Just DC Comics in general. Because there's loads of fascinating things about DC Comics that even the biggest diehard comic fan doesn't know. Like, do you know who was the first supervillain in comics? It was the Ultra Humanite who debuted in Action Comics number 13 in 1939. He can transfer his mind into different bodies. He usually takes the form of an albino ape. Yeah, during the 30s and 40s, pretty much every comic had to have an ape. It was like a weird obsession. I think it came from King Kong. And that is the first fact about DC Comics. Let's dive in. DC Comics was founded in 1934. It was known as National Allied Publications at the time. It was founded by Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. I bet 99.99% of DC comic fans didn't even know who made the company. DC stands for Detective Comics, which means the company is literally called Detective Comics Comics. Many readers believe that Marvel are better at epic stories. However, DC is said to have more superior standalone stories. Because of this, DC is easy to introduce to new readers. If you want to know the backstory of the Joker, you can read all of it in a single issue in the famous graphic novel Batman the Killing Joke. Comics like Arkham Asylum, Kingdom Come, Batman the Dark Knight Returns, and Batman Year One are only 4 issues long, but are considered to be among the best story arcs in comic history. What makes them even better is readers don't have to read any stories prior to understand the characters because the stories are self-contained. Although DC is considered to be the darker comic book series thanks to characters like Batman, Marvel has dark characters as well, such as Punisher and Daredevil. The main difference though is Marvel tries to disassociate their dark characters from their light-hearted characters. This is why people like Daredevil and Punisher rarely team up with light-hearted characters like Spider-Man. This is also why Daredevil and Punisher are not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, even though they exist in the same universe. But in DC Comics, Batman, who's one of the darkest superheroes, is nearly always one of the main members of the Justice League team. The two most famous DC superheroes are Batman and Superman. Batman was created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, and Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Although Marvel movies are more successful than DC movies, DC inarguably has the advantage in animation. Although the Spider-Man and X-Men shows of the 90s were well received, and Marvel has other successes since, DC churns out more shows that are of a higher quality. The most famous example is, of course, the 1992 show, Batman the Animated Series. DC doesn't just have the advantage over Marvel in animated series, but animated films. There are very few animated Marvel films. Ultimate Avengers 1 and 2, Hulk versus... That's about it. DC, on the other hand, have films like Batman Assault on Arkham, Justice League Doom, Justice League War, Justice League vs. Teen Titans, Superman Batman Apocalypse, All-Star Superman, Justice League The Flashpoint Paradox, and about a dozen animated Batman films, including Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which is considered to be a masterpiece. In 1984, DC Comics strongly considered merging with Marvel. At the time, DC was making a profit in all merchandise except in comics, which was hemorrhaging money. Marvel was dominating DC throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, but in 1986, Batman was reinvented in the Dark Knight Returns story, and just to prove it wasn't a fluke, DC released Batman Year One 1 year later. Both stories were considered to be the best Batman stories ever, which solidified Batman as DC's biggest weapon against Marvel. In 1985, the writers believed that the stories had gotten so confusing they had to restructure everything. This led to DC's most epic story, Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was a 12-issue story about a being called the Anti-Monitor who attempted to undo the multiverse. The Anti-Monitor was the most powerful being in existence with the power to eradicate universes with antimatter. He nearly succeeded as he destroyed all universes but one. The heroes of Earth eventually destroyed him. The reason these parallel universes were created was to justify story inconsistencies. How come Batman doesn't use guns, but he used to? Did he originally used to live in New York? How come Batman was fighting Nazis in the 1940s, but he's still young decades later? Because of these irregularities, the writers claimed any contradictions in stories or characters were because those stories took place in a parallel universe. To showcase that the company was going in a different direction after the success of Crisis on Infinite Earths, the company nearly changed its name to Action Comics. DC nearly went out of business in the early 1990s. DC knew they had to do something drastic, so they wrote a story where Batman had his back broken and Superman died. Naturally, sales skyrocketed. Although the writers were happy, they realized that their two biggest heroes were out of commission. They had to invent convoluted stories to bring back Superman and Batman. Luckily, the plan worked, and DC Comics became successful once more. Since DC and Marvel are rivals, they sometimes use dirty tactics against each other. In 2010, Marvel prompted a comic called Siege, saying that readers would receive a free copy if they sent in 50 ripped DC covers. IGN regularly do polls on comic books. According to their polls, the greatest superhero of all time in any comic is Superman, the greatest Justice Leaguer is Batman, the greatest supervillain is the Joker, and the sexiest comic book character is Nightwing. The smartest being in all of DC Comics is Brainiac. The smartest human on Earth is Lex Luthor. However, the smartest superhero is Batman. The most expensive comic of all time is, unsurprisingly, Action Comics #1, which was written in 1938 and is the official debut of Superman. It was sold for just over $2 million by Nicolas Cage at an auction. Sometimes in comics there are multiple versions of a superhero. Jay Garrick, Barry Allen, Wally West, and Bart Allen are known as The Flash. However, Barry Allen is considered to be the official one. Steve Rogers, Bucky Barnes, and Sam Wilson have taken on the mantle as Captain America, but Steve Rogers is the official one. In Marvel, the official version of most superheroes is the first incarnation. Peter Parker is Spider-Man, Tony Stark is Iron Man, Bruce Banner is Hulk. In DC Comics, the second incarnation of a superhero is usually the official one. Barry Allen is the official Flash, even though Jay Garrick was the first. Hal Jordan is the official Green Lantern, even though Alan Scott was the first. So, why is this? To explain this, let's look at the beginning of DC Comics, which is known as the Golden Age of Comics. This was obviously the debut of iconic superheroes like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Although many other superheroes followed, like Hawkman, Green Arrow, and so on, they tanked. Superman and Batman were released before World War II. After World War II began, comic sales went into a slump. DC didn't get out of this slump until the 1950s when they rebooted their comics with the new Flash, Barry Allen. Readers thought this character was much cooler than the previous Flash. When DC writers got wind of this, they created a lot of new versions of the original superheroes. This ushered in the Silver Age of comics. DC Comics headquarters are located in Burbank in California. The popular satirizing magazine Mad was published by DC Comics in 1952. The films Road to Perdition and A History of Violence were based on comics created by DC Comics. DC also created an imprint called Tangent Comics in 1997. This imprint gave brand new backstories for iconic characters like the Joker or Superman. It lasted 1 year before it was cancelled. Although DC does not have as many events as Marvel Comics, they have more of an impact over the DC universe. DC's events are so epic, they've rebooted the entire universe multiple times. Although Marvel has tried to reboot their universes several times, they've only succeeded recently. DC Comics and Marvel Comics originally had the exact same publisher. His name was Lloyd Jacquet, and he published New Fun Comics, which introduced the DC heroes Aquaman and Green Arrow in issue 72. Years later, he published Marvel Comics #1, starring the Human Torch, the first superhero that Marvel ever created. I won't be looking at really iconic characters that much, like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, because they all deserve their own list. So I'll be looking at more obscure characters, like the Omega Men. They're a group of freedom fighters who travel the cosmos, battling rebels and bringing peace to the world. They're like the Guardians of the Galaxy, except they're not jerks. Almost every character in comics has died and come back to life at least once at some point. Some of them have done it multiple times. But it was Lightning Lad who was the first superhero in any comic to die and come back to life. John Dandy debuted as Yankee Doodle in Doom Patrol 51 in 1992. He might have the world record for the longest time between inception and appearing in a comic. When Marvel Comics devised Venom, he didn't actually appear in the comics for 2 years. When DC devised Yankee Doodle, he didn't appear for 28 years. Although he was devised in 1964, he didn't show up until the 1990s. He was a spy, he used an adhesive to make his face have no features, making him a master of disguise. The Mafia is almost never referenced in comics because the writers are terrified that mobsters will kill them. So instead, they use a substitute mafia called the Intergang. They're basically a worldwide mafia gang that work with supervillains. Another super team is the Global Guardians. Each member of the team is from a different country. This team was created to educate readers about different nations. The Outsiders are a team of superheroes with severe deformities. Most of the members' deformities are caused by their own superpower. It's basically like a deformed version of the X-Men. The Justice League fights many evil teams. The biggest and most famous one is the Legion of Doom. The reason why it's so iconic is because it was composed of not just bad guys, but the antagonist of every superhero. It was founded and led by Lex Luthor. It didn't actually debut in the comics, it first appeared in the TV show Challenge of the Super Friends. They appeared in the debut episode in 1978. They also appeared in South Park. That was weird. There's another team called the Secret Society of Supervillains, often known as simply the Society, which is an evil Justice League that is based in Gotham. DC Comics have their own version of a mutant called a metahuman. According to Lex Luthor, over 87% of all violent metahumans escape within 3 months of incarceration, 1 month if we're talking about Arkham. There's a superhero dating app called Caper. Belle Reve is the name of a prison designed for superhumans. Many Belle Reve inmates have become members of the Suicide Squad. Unsurprisingly, the facility has become the Suicide Squad's main base. The Slab is a prison located in Antarctica. It houses the most dangerous inmates in the world. Even if they escaped, the prisoners would have nowhere to go. Anytime DC Comics has to reference the Middle East, they gotta be careful because they don't want to upset Middle Easterns. As a result, most Middle Eastern conflicts in DC occur in a fictional country called Kandak. The greatest scientific laboratory in the world in DC is Star Labs. It stands for Scientific and Technological Advanced Research Labs. There are 13 immortals that walk the earth. For unknown reasons, there can be no more or no less. If one immortal somehow lost his or her immortality, another person would become immortal. Batman, Green Arrow, and Wonder Woman did not earn their money. Their fortunes were inherited. However, Poison Ivy and Lex Luthor were born in poverty. Despite this, Lex Luthor went on to become the richest man in the world, as well as the smartest, and became the President of the United States. Poison Ivy raises millions of dollars and regularly gives sums to ecological charities. In comics, rich superheroes seem to be heirs to their fortunes, while rich supervillains had to work for a living, so I'm not sure what to make of that. During the millennium, DC created a series called 52, which was a series that showed how the superheroes of the world functioned when Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman took a break for a year. 52 is important because most comics are released every month. However, DC released a brand new comic every single week. 52 was so successful that it had a sequel called Countdown, which was a weekly series composed of 51 issues. Renowned comic book writer Paul Dini, who wrote Batman the Animated Series and the Arkham games, detested the 52 story and jumped up and down in rage in his office, shouting at the writing team for ruining the characters. Dini said that Countdown was 52 done right. Despite Dini's claims, Countdown was torn apart for boring characters, overdrawn story arcs, unsatisfactory conclusions, ugly art, inappropriate behavior of certain characters, and atrocious dialogue like "I'll kill you to death." Anyone who bought the entire series, excluding all the tie-ins, would have to fork over $153 to read this abysmal story. Some countries have sanctioned the Freedom of Power Treaty. This makes it illegal for American superheroes to interact with any country that has adopted this policy. There are 1.3 million metahumans on Earth. There are 6,500 metahumans that are considered A-level. An A-level metahuman is a person who is so powerful the government needs to monitor them. Obvious examples are Flash, Green Lantern, Shazam, Wonder Woman, and some guy called Superman. Okay guys, let's look at the big one. Let's look at the DC multiverse. In the DC universe, there are 52 parallel dimensions. Earth 3 is the backwards universe. Lex Luthor is good, the Justice League is evil, Christopher Columbus was an American who discovered Europe, Abraham Lincoln assassinated President John Wilkes Booth, and so forth. Earth 4 contains characters that are owned by Charlton Comics like Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, The Question, and others. These were eventually absorbed into DC Comics. Earth 5 contains characters from Fawcett Comics like Shazam, Black Adam, and Savannah. When Fawcett Comics were cancelled, the characters were implemented into DC Comics. Stan Lee wrote his own version of DC heroes like Batman, Superman, Flash, and Wonder Woman. These stories take place in Earth 6. Okay, I'm not going to look at all the parallel Earths, but let's look at some fun ones. Earth 8 is a parody of the Marvel Universe. Earth 10 is a Nazi-oriented Earth. Earth 11 is a reverse-gendered Earth with superheroes like Superwoman and Wondrous Man. Earth 12 is a world inspired by the Batman Beyond series. The animated series Young Justice takes place in Earth 16. Earth 22 is the Kingdom Come universe where all the conventional heroes like Batman and Superman have grown old and retired. Earth 30 takes place in a world where Superman's rocket arrived on Earth 12 hours earlier than it should have. This means that Superman landed in Ukraine and was raised with communist beliefs. This was first seen in the comics Superman Red Son, which is one of the greatest Superman comics ever. The Dark Knight Returns story takes place in Earth 21. This is a world where an older Batman has come out of retirement to fight the corruption of the world, including Superman who works for a totalitarian government. Okay, let's look at some teams in the DC universe. The Injustice Gang was the first team where solo villains like Poison Ivy and Scarecrow banded together against the superheroes of Earth. This idea was well received, and there have been many similar teams since. Although the Injustice Gang was created to battle the world's superheroes, the Anti-Justice League was formed solely to destroy the Justice League. The Injustice League debuted in 1989. I know what you're thinking, how many of these teams are there? Their answer is a lot. Although the Injustice League was formed by an unknown villain called Agamemnon, it would later be known as Lex Luthor's team, and has become the official version of the bad Justice League since. The Gotham City Sirens were a group of supervillainesses based in Gotham. The team was usually composed of Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and Harley Quinn. Checkmate is an organization that monitors and regulates all superheroes and supervillains in the world. They know the identities of most superheroes, but only get involved when necessary. One of the most important things in all of DC Comics is the source wall. The source wall encircles the entire universe in every direction. It is not known how to circumvent or breach it. The source of all existence lies behind the source wall. The source works like a conduit of God. And what's really, really weird is the source wall debuted in an X-Men comic. Marvel did a crossover with DC in Uncanny X-Men and a New Teen Titans in 1982. As I said, there are 52 universes in the multiverse. Each universe has a source wall surrounding it. The area between each universe is called the bleed. If a being from one universe travels to another universe, it weakens the bleed. Over time, it can collapse the entire multiverse. In 2018, the source wall was destroyed, which changed the fundamental laws of the universe. Although the Flash is known for tapping into the Speed Force, the source wall's destruction created 3 new forces called the Still Force, the Sage Force, and the Strength Force, which certain people can tap into. Although there's Green Lanterns, Red Lanterns, and so on, the source wall's destruction activated a new lantern called the Ultraviolet Core. It has been recently revealed that there is 52 other universes, which is a corrupted multiverse, which the characters we're familiar in DC are evil. This is called the Dark Multiverse. It's basically like the upside down of the DC universe. One thing that's very popular in DC Comics is Elseworlds. Elseworlds are a popular what-if publication imprint in DC Comics. They put classic superheroes in new timelines, parallel universes, or crossovers with other characters that are not necessarily affiliated with DC Comics, such as Spider-Man or Daredevil. The first story of Elseworld was Batman Gotham by Gaslight. The story takes place in 1889 during the Victorian era. In this comic, Batman battles against a serial killer, Jack the Ripper. In a Bram Stoker-inspired story, Batman became a vampire to battle Dracula. In an Untouchables-themed comic, Batman helped Elliot Ness take down Al Capone. In Last Son of Earth, Superman is put on a rocket and escapes his doomed planet of Earth and lands on Krypton. Although Crisis on Infinite Earths is the most famous example of rebooting comics, it is not the only time DC have done this. In September 2012, DC Comics rebooted the DC Universe again. In the first month of the reboot, DC published the first issue of 52 new comics. This means that they started Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and 48 others from scratch to new readers. They set the heroes in modern day so new readers didn't have to understand 75 years of backstories and continuity. This was called the New 52. At first, the 52 reboot was criticized due to sexism. Not only were there very few female writers, but most of the female characters like Wonder Woman and Starfire were hypersexualized and their costumes were considered inappropriately sexual even by comic book standards. Like, how does Starfire even put that on? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. After the New 52 ran for 52 issues, that reboot concluded in February 2016 and was rebooted once again with Rebirth. Rebirth is supposed to be a combination of the positive elements of the New 52 and the original DC universe. Certain characters in Rebirth have been altered to resemble their film counterparts. For example, Amanda Waller was depicted as a morbidly obese middle-aged woman in the original comics. In the New 52 reboot, she was a young, sexy woman. Since Rebirth has launched, her appearance has changed to resemble that of the actress Viola Davis, who played the character in Suicide Squad. New 52 was criticized for being too dark. Because of this, DC Comics promised to make Rebirth focus on making the characters more fun. When a publishing company reboots its entire comic series, they need to do something bold and drastic to get readers' attention. Rebirth began with the DC characters having a brief interaction with the characters from the Watchmen series. Watchmen is a Vertigo comic series, which is a side company of DC Comics. This is the first time the Watchmen have associated with characters like Superman and Batman. And finally, it was eventually revealed that the entire New 52 universe was created by Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen series, since Dr. Manhattan has the ability to control tachyons, which can manipulate time, space, and matter. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like these facts, I've written 15 books about comics. They're all available on Amazon on paperback and Kindle. Please let me know if there's any other characters from DC, superheroes or supervillains, you want me to do a video about, and I'll upload it as soon as possible.